Hey everyone, welcome back to my patio. Got a few things out here that we're going to talk about today. So as I said in the first video, we're going to talk bonsai and we're going to talk gardening in general. So I have been doing some gardening since the last video and I brought a few things. The first thing I want to show you is our seeds came in at the garden center at Earthworks, and I found two varieties of sugar snap peas that I am very interested in growing. You also probably noticed if you watched the first video that I have a pergola above me and all around me with grapevines, and the grapes are going dormant soon. So I am going to be planting sugar snap peas at the bases of the pergola and let it grow up over where the grapevines were. Sugar snap peas are a nice winter crop here in Northeast Florida, and I'm super stoked. I have grown these many times and they're very rewarding. They're so good fresh. You can get them in the grocery store and they're okay. You know, they're good, but if you grow them yourself and harvest them right off the vine, the flavor integrity is amazing. Nothing like the grocery store. So if you've never grown sugar snap peas, I highly encourage it. Just they need a trellis. And they need mild temperatures. They really don't like anything above the upper 70s. So once the temperatures start looking like it's going to be in the 70s consistently, that's a good time to grow the sugar snap peas. So I'm probably going to plant a few scout seeds a little early. It's still warm, but I'm going to plant a few and get like a little head start. And then once the temperatures and the projected temperatures start looking like it's going to be in the 70s consistently, I'll plant the rest of the packet. So I got 4 packs. Which should be plenty of sugar snap peas. I doubt if many of them will even make it in the house because it's a great snack when I'm outside gardening. Just like to pull the sugar snap peas right off the vine. And absolutely delicious. Second thing I wanted to show you is that I have a really interesting plant here. This is Jatropha Berlandieri. And as you can see, it is a it's got a caudex down here. So plants, caudiforms, have swollen trunks, a big swollen tuber, almost looks like a potato. So in nature, this part, the swollen part, is actually underground. But in cultivation and in my garden, and how most people treat these, is they actually keep this above the soil because it looks really cool. That's actually part of the interest, is this big swollen caudex down here. And then it has these beautiful leaves. Very cool. And then it flowers. I don't have this one blooming at the moment, but it has beautiful flowers. I do have some other Jatrophas I'm going to show you, and the flowers are very similar. But they attract beneficial pollinators, hummingbirds and butterflies for sure, and I'm sure a few other types of flies, perhaps wasps and bees. But a really easy plant to grow. You treat it like a cactus or succulent. It likes to stay dry. And on occasion, as it dries out completely, you water it again. And I also fertilize mine to keep it growing throughout the warm season and also blooming. So I have a couple more over here that I wanted to show you. They also have swollen trunks. This is the Potagrica. And you can see this one actually does some branching. This one's still fairly young. I think this one might be only 8 years or so at the most. Grown from a young plant that I have. I got that at Earthworks many years ago. And then since then I have grown them from seed. So they grow really well from seed. So I have one of its young offspring right here. The flowers just fell off of this one. Flowers just fell off. But you can see it has the coral colored stem at the tip here where the flowers were. And then on my other plant over here, I'll show you what the flowers look like. So that is the Potagrica, and then there's the Multifida. And you can see the flowers here. There's a couple of them that are open. Really cool little flowers. They're all very similar on the Jatrophas. So this one here, long, leggy, I'm probably going to cut this back. It's a branching variety as well, and I wanted to experiment with it as a bonsai. So I'm getting the trunk nice and thick here at the bottom. And there's another branch forming here. It's got a little green bud on the top, so hopefully here before winter it'll throw out some new leaves and develop a little bit. Have another long branch here that I am tempted to cut back as well and take a cutting here because it's got a little bud here that may branch, but I'm thinking about taking it pretty extreme and cutting it way down here and then doing several cuttings along the stem and growing these from cuttings. I'm going to bring this down so that way the canopy will be forming somewhere around the 12 to 13 inch mark. Now by cutting a plant that's apically dominant or dominant toward the top here, when you cut it, when you make a cutting like that, it actually stimulates dormant buds on the plant. And that's true for most branching plants and also for plants that don't branch. When you do cut the top, now that's not true for every non-branching plant, which would be a monocot, and I think we talked a little bit about those in the first video. But monocots are less likely, so if you were to cut the top of a palm tree, for example, it would not create a new shoot. But if you were to prune a monocot like a cordyline or a dracaena on their stems, they will actually put out a little side shoot and create a new leader from the top. So we're going to see what happens here. I definitely have some buds forming, and I will be curious to see what happens when I do these extreme prunings. Probably wait until early spring. So here in Northeast Florida, that's going to be end of February, beginning of March. Actually, we'll probably make a video of it, and we'll document what happens to this plant as I do the cuttings. Now, if you joined us in the first video back here on the patio, you saw that we talked a little bit about the Portulacaria afra. I have many of these, and I introduced you to the mother. So this is a Portulacaria afra when it's been trained in the form of bonsai. And it has been many years of training, trimming, pruning, different techniques to get the branches in the positions where I want them, and using a lot of different horticultural principles to keep it healthy and growing very well. Now right next to it here, and we'll get a shot a little further out, I'll pull this back a little bit, but this is Portulacaria afra in its natural form. So you can see the difference. So sometimes in order to appreciate a thing, you have to have some compare and contrast. So I wanted you to see what this plant looks like when it's not trained. It looks more like a long leggy shrub, very healthy in its natural form, but it looks nothing like a tree, right? So that is really, in a nutshell, kind of exemplifies the art of bonsai. So you take a thing and then you train it so that it resembles a completely different thing. And in this case, I am training it to look like a windswept tree. It's kind of leaning back here with some branches that are kind of coming back this way. And each tree is a little bit different in how I'm training them. But this is its natural form, and if you look real close here, you'll see there's a lot of distance between the leaves, whereas on this here, now I have just pruned it, but the distance between the leaves is much tighter and much closer, and that's intentional because I'm trying to create a thick, dense canopy that's in scale with the size of the trunk and the branching. So in nature, we have a lot of distance between the branching. When you're pruning, every time you prune the plant, the distance between the nodes, so the nodes are right here between the branches, it's that distance between the branches or the nodes. As you prune this over time and you consistently keep up with it, the distance gets smaller and smaller and tighter, and therefore you can create a tree form with a tight canopy that has less distance between the branching, which gives it a more realistic look, and it looks more like a tree. So on the mother plant, on the other side of the patio here, the big one, you can see how dense and thick that canopy is becoming. So with a lot of training, a lot of pruning, keeping up with the growth rate, the branching and the spacing becomes appropriate for the size of the trunk. Now you can see here I got a sling holding this branch down. That branch was kind of like, not quite at a 45, but it was pointing much further upwards. So if you look at trees in nature, and that's what we're trying to do, we're trying to simulate what happens in nature here. The bottommost branches of the trees are pointing a little bit more down, and the further up the tree you go, the more the branches are pointing upwards. So what I'm trying to do is simulate an aged tree, so I need to have these lower branches pointing downward. If you get in real close here, you'll see I have a rock on top of this branch, and I'm about ready to pull it off. So that branch was also sticking up, and I wanted it to be a little more level with the soil to give it more of that aged look. And it's been on for a few weeks, and if I take it off, it went up just a little bit. But yeah, it's holding its position pretty well. I do want it to go down a little further, so I'm going to put the rock back on, but what I'm trying to do is to get this branch almost parallel with the soil. So it needs to come down just a little bit, so I might move the rock just a little further out on the branches there. So I found a rock that was appropriate in weight, that would be able to hold that branch in position where I wanted it without snapping the branch. So I'm going to be using this rock method with the Portulacaria to get the branches in the positions that I want as far as pointing upward or downward. So this is really helping. But right now, I guess what I'm showing you are some alternative methods of training these branches to hold the position that you want them to. And I guess I'll switch positions here, but there's several rocks in here, and I've used rocks as wedges and weights to hold branches in positions where I want them. And then I check, almost weekly to see if I can remove the rock permanently or if I need to put it back into position. I've also used a small pebble as a wedge in the bottom of this Moringa tree. This is actually an edible plant. This species, I believe, is from Africa. There's two species, one from Africa and one from India. And the Moringa tree is very edible. Actually, the entire plant is edible, and in some places they consider this a tree of life. The leaves, the stems, they make beans. The beans are edible, the roots are edible. I believe the bark is edible, highly nutritious. A lot of value in growing these. So here in subtropical Florida, we can't grow them as an evergreen. They will go dormant in the wintertime because our winter temperatures get low enough to where it usually knocks it dormant. And then sometimes, unfortunately, we get frosts and freezes that can knock it back all the way to the ground and it has to start all over. But the Moringa tree can grow quite large. Every bit of it's edible. At the last property I lived at, I had several of these growing in the backyard that were over 10 feet tall, and I'd harvest the leaves. They could be eaten fresh in salads or as a garnish. Could also be cooked in soups, stir fries, any way that you would eat any kind of lettuce, spinach. I treat it more like a spinach. It's more of a spinach type leaf. But easy to grow, and with a little bit of protection in the wintertime. I'm going to train this into a multi-stemmed bonsai. It's at its very beginning stages. I'm not going to do much pruning this year, probably next year, and I'll keep you posted on that. So let me show you guys one more thing I've been working on this week. So I showed you the Jatropha Berlandieri, and I had a customer at Earthworks who bought one, and hers flowered and was pollinated, and it created seeds. So she was nice enough to share some seeds with me, and so in this community pot here, I call it a community pot, I think other people do too, where I planted multiple seeds in one pot. So I planted 5 by 5, so 25 seeds in this tray, and hopefully in the next week or so, I planted them on the 10th. So it's been just over a week. Hopefully in another week or so, they will start to germinate, and then I'll have little baby Jatrophas here that I'll be growing from seed, and I'll keep you all posted of that as well. It is a really easy plant to grow. So any Jatropha, super easy. It's just depending on where you live would depend on how much protection you need to give them in the wintertime. But if you grow them in containers and you have some frosty nights, they're very easy to bring indoors and protect. If you try to grow these in the ground, it might be a little more difficult if you are in areas where it gets below freezing for any length of time. But here in Northeast Florida, our frosts and freezes are very short and sweet, thankfully. And covering and protecting is not as much of a chore as it would be further north of here. So let me get down to a little bit of an activity here. So what I'm going to do is show you on this Portulacaria that's growing wild. It's a beautiful beast here. I'm going to show you how I do the basic pruning. So let's look at this branch right here. And you see this little side branch coming off, and there's a lot of distance between the nodes. So if I want to begin training this branch, I would simply make a quick cut between the nodes, usually about halfway, and usually about at a 45-degree angle, like that. Now, what's cool about this plant, and I showed this in the last video we made, is that they take from cuttings very easily. So what I would do now is I take off the bottom leaves, probably the first two sets on this one. So I'd have just about an inch that stick beneath the soil, and I'll do that a little bit later. But really, that's all you need to do to prepare these for cuttings. I have a community pot of cuttings over here that I took a few weeks ago. They're not quite ready, I keep these evenly moist. So these are, I mean, this is really how my collection begins, is with these small cuttings. It's really fun to start them when they're really small because you have more control of the final shape of the finished bonsai. Whereas, you know, I cut this whole thing off, right? Now, the advantage and the pros and cons are I got a huge jump start. I mean, this thing's got a nice thick trunk for a cutting on it already. So here's my finger, you can see probably about as thick as my pinky on the trunk right out of the gate. Whereas with these, it's going to be a long time in the community pot of cuttings. I mean, these cuttings are like the size of this branch or this branch here. So it's going to be several seasons, if not more, before these cuttings look anything like this. So this is a great way for me to get a jump start, get some trees formed fast. But I do really enjoy the small cuttings as well because it's really fun to enjoy the journey of that young cutting and watching it and training it all the way to where it becomes something that looks more like this or something that looks more like this, you know. And from a young cutting to this can be many years, but it's a lot of fun. So while we're out here this morning, I'm going to introduce you to a few other young plants. This one here is a young elm tree. And what I like about this elm, I've collected this as a seedling. It's got this cool curved trunk at the base, and I've used this rock here to prop it up so it kind of holds that curvature there. I need to get a bigger rock, but this secondary rock is supposed to hold that in position, but we get high winds here sometimes which blow things around. Also, we have raccoons. I have just recently discovered that the raccoons love to climb up the pergola here on the grapevines and climb to the top. I'm sure they're interested in the grapes, but they come over in this corner here. They've knocked over a few pots, so I've stacked up some extra pots over here so that if they put one of their feet on my pots and knock it over, it won't have so far to drop. But in the last couple of weeks, I've lost 2 or 3 pots. Now the plants have been fine, however, the pots not so much. And I do have a backlog of pots, which is nice, but I don't want pots breaking every week either. So I have the elm tree, very young. I also have the native red maple. Now these are really young. These are really young seedlings. But what's cool about Acer rubrum, which is the scientific name, the red maple, just within 2 or 3 years you can have a really interesting looking tree. These things grow so fast. So I pump them full of water during the summer. I feed them every week with a liquid fertilizer. And I have a few different types of liquid fertilizers that I like to use for different purposes. Sometimes high in nitrogen, sometimes high in phosphorus, trying to develop the root system as well as getting a lot of green growth. But these things grow so quickly that you can cut on them so many times during the warm season that you can get branching and trunk thickening much quicker than you would with a lot of other types of hardwood trees. But the red maple here in Northeast Florida grows right in the woods, which means it has built-in immunity. It has evolved here over a long period of time, so built-in immunity to not only the climate, but also insects and disease. So it's a pretty carefree plant. So if you do have local trees in your area, in the springtime, after the seeds have dropped, you can start collecting seedlings below and around the trees in your neighborhood. Or you can walk around your town, walk around common spaces, parks. Trees are dropping seeds in the spring, and then a month or so afterwards, you're going to see these little seedlings everywhere. Bring a little shovel, a little trowel, a little chopstick action, and pull them up. And then if you are collecting them, bring with you some kind of a bag and some moist towels so that you can wrap the roots in moist towels and keep them moist while you're collecting them until you get them home. Something as simple as paper towels in a Ziploc bag I've used before. You can use burlap for bigger specimens, but keep the roots moist while you're out and about collecting. And then when you get them home, moisten some potting soil and get them transplanted as soon as possible. And then the shock of that transplanting will be much less if the roots were kept moist the entire time. All right, I think we covered quite a bit in this episode. So I'm just kind of teasing you with a lot of basics. And what we're going to be doing throughout this series is revisiting a lot of these things that I've touched on and going into more detail. Hope you've been enjoying watching this gardening series. Check us out on YouTube. Please subscribe. We also have a Facebook page. Earthworks Jax is the easiest way to find us here in Northeast Florida. Until next time.